everyone, and welcome to Stored Procedures. Okay, so now you have completed a bunch of programs, applications, and developed a nice CRUD application, and you're well on your way to being a full-time database application programmer. Good job. What we want to do here is kind of throw a little curveball at you. Not much of one, but start talking about another way that programmers in the industry actually call the database, and it's called stored procedures. And so we'll get into what stored procedures are and why we should actually use them. Okay. So a stored procedure is a prepared SQL code that you can save, or the code that's reused over and over again. It's SQL code. You will actually put it in the databases itself. So you actually build the store procedure in the database. In our case, you will build it in SQL Server, right in your database. And so what this store procedure does for the most part is execute a query. You actually build the query in the store procedure. Does it look a little bit different than what you're used to? It does, but we're not going to go too deep into them. Like I said before, I think I said in my instructions, store procedures can get very complicated. They can become very programmatic, I should say. Logic to them, and so on. And you can learn more and more about that. And we actually talk about that in our Database 2 class. With that said, for this particular class, we just want to introduce them. And you're going to kind of replace some of the things you've already done with stored procedures. So at least you know what they are, how to use them, how to pass parameters to them, and so on. All right? So if you've ever had a SQL query that you write over and over again, you can save it as a stored procedure. The other reason is, and this is going to get into why using them, is that once again, when you go out and you start your first programming job, more than likely you're going to work in a place that many people work at. Many programmers are there. Maybe not, but in most cases you will. So instead of writing the same call to the same database multiple times, okay, this gets back to the whole concept of creating functions and modules and so on and classes and all those types of things to share your code. This is the database version of this, where you're basically writing the call to the database one time, and it only has to be in one place, and it can be modified and so on in one place. It's the same concept. So a stored procedure is a set of structured query language, like I said before, with an assigned name, which are stored in your relational database management system as a group, so it can be reused and shared by multiple programs. Stored procedures can access or modify data in a database, but it is not tied to a specific database or object, which offers a number of advantages than just calling it. And so stored procedures can be used in any really database you have out there. SQL Server, Oracle, Access, even Access I think now allows you to use them, MySQL, and so on. So what's the benefits? A stored procedure provides an important layer of security. It does do that, okay? If you think about it, what's happening right now in your inline programming that you just completed, the program is executing the query. So what it's doing is going to the database and going and asking for that data back. So that's considered I/O in a sense. And there's some security issues around that, okay? If we actually call it from our programs versus executing from our programs, the database does all the work. So it stays out of our programs per se. Things should run a little bit faster, number one. And number two, it's more secure, so nobody who tries to peek into our program or whatever they're trying to do can actually see what we're trying to do with our database, because we're just calling it, and it sits on a dedicated server that's probably even more secure. All right. Preserves data integrity because information is entered in a consistent manner, no doubt about that. So usually in a stored procedure, it's written a certain way. The place you're going to work at is going to show you how to write a stored procedure. Again, I'll show you how to do that here also, but for the most part, it's rather simple, okay? Again, since modular, it is easier to troubleshoot when a problem arises in the application. So once again, we're going to get rid of stored procedures. Gets rid of writing your calls. When I say calls, your queries, meaning select statements, inserts, updates, deletes in your program. I know that's what you've been doing, and you've been cutting and pasting and modifying and building these strings. We're going to take all of that and move it to again, the database and build our queries there. So it's one central place. You will not have those types of things in your program anymore. I will say not everybody in the world uses stored procedures, but but you do see them out there. At one point in time, it was a big thing in industry. Everybody used them. Now, I'm not sure. I think it's probably, I don't know, it's 50-50 or maybe 80% stored procedures, 20% inline. But I want to make sure you understand them. That's the whole concept. Okay. Stored procedures are also tunable, which eliminates the need to modify the GUI. So if you need to go in and modify what you're trying to do, update the query and so on, you stay away from your programming code. It's always good to stay away from 100% working and tested programming code, because once you go in and start filling around with it, more than likely you're going to make a mistake somewhere that could break other things. So again, you make a call to a central place, and this stored procedures, when it's sitting there, you go to the stored procedure to update everything. Use the stored procedure to reduce network traffic, no doubt about it. Though that's not as big a need as it used to be, but going back and forth between the database and the program could cause traffic issues. And when I say that, if multiple people's going against the database at the same time, with that, it could slow things down. With stored procedures, everything is executed when it comes to database queries at the database. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, one of the big things is also reuse. I think we talked about that in there, but the whole reuse piece of stored procedures. Okay, that's what a stored procedure is. It's actually very simplistic. There's nothing really hard about it. What we'll do now is kind of show you how they work, how to build one, give you some information on how to even take it to another level if you want to. Again, we're going to keep it rather simplistic in this course. But then, like I said, and then play around with them a little bit and show you how to use it in our code, meaning how we call it the stored procedure from our code. Okay? So anyway, that's the introduction to stored procedures.